So, Josh, we've made it through our first season, and I thought it might be interesting if we went over our first dozen episodes and just kind of talked high level about general themes and what we enjoyed discussing in season one.
Yeah, I love that idea, and I thought we could also end with discussing some of the themes, topics, and episodes we'll be covering when we get back here on November 4th.
Yeah, that sounds great. Let's get started.
You're listening to It Might Be Interesting with your hosts, Josh Levy
And Jon Walsh.
Now, there's an endless amount of information out there on any given topic.
And sometimes you just need somebody who can extrapolate it in a way that might be interesting. So I'm going to kick it off here with episode 1, which was the state of religion in America. One of the things that I found most interesting is that the millennial generation has the same number of non-religious people as the 65 and older have of evangelical. So 38% of millennials are non-religious, whereas 38% of 65 and older are white evangelical.
Yeah, and for me in that episode, it was the fact that this decline has been so much more significant or pronounced here in America compared to other parts of the world. We haven't seen it in Catholic countries like Mexico or Italy or Spain or anything like that. And I do believe it's largely because of the evangelical, the prosperity gospel and everything that you only see in America.
So how about episode 2? What did you find to be the most interesting in researching that?
Well, with episode 2, it is how both parties have systematically screwed the American people over time, death by 1,000 cuts. And one by one, each bill has contributed to this completely toxic system, and how I would say, if I could sum it up, I would say that it's the realization when you do the research that we need to stop this socialist versus free market, capitalist argument, because we have neither. We need to step back and realize the country we have is socialist for a few at the top and capitalist for the rest of us fighting for the scraps. And the moment you realize that, I told you earlier with someone close to me who had very different views, didn't try steer them one way or another. The moment they realize that, it does put things into a perspective of where the problem lies.
I think the thing that I found interesting was something I researched on the Walton family making more in a minute than their employees make in a year. Just an absurd amount of wealth, concentrated into one family that, quite frankly, makes probably more money than everybody in Arkansas put together. It's just like, at some point, do we really need that kind of, does one family or one person need billions and billions of dollars? I thought it was interesting to see how absurd their wealth was.
Right, and also, is raising the taxes for them by 2%, is that punishing them for being successful? No, it's not. It's not punishing and really getting away from that fairness doctrine, because people are starting to go, something doesn't smell very fair.
So episode 3, we looked at the state of media in America. We started with the media bias chart. And what I found interesting about that chart, after we talked about it and then I talked to other people about it, I hear people push back on it, and they're like, well, I don't think the New York Times should be in the top center, and I don't think Fox News is that far low on the right, and blah, blah, blah. But what they don't argue about is the outline of the graph itself, right? They agree that responsible news, nuanced, fact-based reporting should be at the top center, and they agree that as far left and in the corner bottom left should be partisan left, and likewise on the right.
Yeah.
They may disagree what logo should be there, But there's a lot of data that they've used to quantify where those logos should be, and I found that interesting that people may disagree with where those media outlets should lie on the graph, but they don't disagree with the gimmick of the mechanism of the graph itself.
Right. And to me, when I also think that graph was that stood out, not in a shocking way. It stood out because you saw it and you were like, yes. It just felt so accurate, and it was such an accurate representation of what we coined the media diet itself.
Right, yeah.
Because it's where, wherever you are, you look and I'd go, oh man, I used to listen to MSNBC all the time, and I was disgusted by Fox News, and I had no appetite for Associated Press
Right,
or
yeah.
NPR or Reuters. And if I watched Fox News, I would, feel strongly about the left, maybe better or worse, whatever, but I didn't have any appetite for Associated Press. And the moment you do the media diet and you
Yeah.
start watching Associated Press, you just have no appetite. It's not that you hate Fox or MSNBC. It's not that you just literally lose your appetite for it.
Yeah, and there's a bit of I think one of the things you talked about was the sandpaper on your back, as being your tolerance meter, and I've found that to be very true. So in episode 4, we learned about the Nazi power tool and how it's used to split the room. But I think on that one, I think what I enjoyed most out of that episode was the case study that you found that talked about how political tolerance is moderated when you have a more nuanced view of the news, which allows you to kind of ignore or not be so concerned by media that is generating fear, anger, and hatred. The more well-informed you are and the more nuanced you are, the less susceptible you are to be manipulated through those emotions.
Yeah, and for that, I think when you mentioned the propaganda from Nazi Germany and everything, what really stood out to me was the idea we have of journalistic integrity and the absolute deterioration of journalistic integrity we've seen in America. And here's a quick example where this is where I get to throw shade at both parties. Maybe one's worse than the other, but right now I believe accusing Obama and likening him to Stalin or Chairman Mao or anyone who set up like the Gulag death camp or work camps / death camps. And Chairman Mao was so grotesquely irresponsible. It was not factually based. It was not based out of fact. Just like how you can hate President Trump, his policies are extremely different from Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler wanted the entire world to fly under the Nazi flag. Trump just wants to close the borders and say, screw you. Adolf Hitler would not have hired half of his cabinet as Jews. Like, there are so many things where, and yet he is likened in the media to Hitler. He has been in the past. And I find that kind of sloppy, emotional-driven journalism, that integrity is actually dangerous, and it should not be a nice-to-have anymore. We need to go back to where it was a must-have. Woodward and Bernstein, today they would have been told to release the story long before they had any evidence, but they did it the right way, which is why it had impact. And so when you mentioned that story with how Nazis use propaganda and how the media can so easily
turn on the power tool.
Become a tool for propaganda without recognizing it because you've trusted this news channel for so long. We really need to reestablish that journalistic integrity.
And they rely on those 3 buttons, fear, anger, and hatred. It works really well. In episode 5, we continued the conversation with the illustrated book of bad arguments, and we touched on, how a bad argument is used as kind of a wedge into flipping the narrative around. We see a lot of this in partisan media. There's a lot of whataboutisms. Oh well, I don't like this person. Oh well, what about this guy? He's just as bad. There's a lot of ad hominem attacks and things like that. And I really enjoyed discussing that book because I've had it on my coffee table for years. And it's great that somebody else finds it interesting too, because, if you are used to having discussions or arguing with people, you can start picking out those bad arguments and showing them the holes in their philosophies pretty easily.
Yeah, and that was actually what I was going to kind of pick from that episode that I loved also, because I love those moments in life where you go, oh damn, that's me.
Yeah.
It's a kind of a sucker punch to the gut a little bit, but you read through these and you just immediately think of other people who've done this, and it makes you angry. And then you think about it a little more, and you're like, shit, I sometimes do that too. But that's a good thing. Like, you need
You
more of
refine
that.
your own argument.
And you refine your argument. You realize that you are not perfect, and therefore you look at others and are forgiving of others who aren't perfect. But anyway, I liked how and it showed the nuance of, this might seem harmless, but it actually is extremely dishonest. Or it might seem, maybe it's not harmful, but it's at least a lot more dishonest than we think it is.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. In episode 6, we talked about the migration patterns of, Midwesterners out from the Midwest to the coastal regions. What did you find most striking in that conversation?
I would say the transfer of political power and influence, meaning one fact that we talked about was, as the population in like Michigan had gone down, the number of electoral votes they had also went down. Or maybe it was Ohio. I need to double check.
I think it was all of them.
Yeah, I mean, it was all of them. I think one of them stood out quite a
Illinois
bit.
was the one that you brought attention to.
Yeah, that's right. And so, the reason that was important is you had people who used to matter. That was a state where, I don't care who you were running for president, you absolutely landed there in that state, even if it was a crash landing. We don't care. You land there and talk to the people. You mattered. There was a seat at the table if your name was Iowa or Ohio or Michigan. But as it's gone down, it's been this like vicious cycle. You lose people, you lose importance and vote, you lose economic opportunity, which also leads to losing more people, which leads to, and then it's clear why they feel the way they feel about coastal quote-unquote elites.
Yeah, I think the thing that I found interesting in that was that they have a higher percentage of the GDP being generated out of those states, and they see less for it. The other thing is that a lot of my reading led me into the direction that it's hard to say they care more, but it's more like their voting is more motivated by cultural issues and cultural concerns and fears rather than policy ideas and policy concerns. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So episode 7, we discussed labor unions and their effect on the American economy. I think the thing that I found most interesting was just how the benefit differences when we did a A/B test and we reviewed this company has a union, this company doesn't. Which one? You could tell just by the numbers which one is benefiting, and it just seems systemically that those that work within a labor union have better benefits.
Right, and I think for me the most striking thing was, and infuriating, is how where the heck the rhetoric switched and flipped about perceiving labor unions as being these anti-capitalist, anti-conservative, and Republicans just think they're the enemy when they technically are the best friend of a conservative. They most issues are resolved without government intervention.
Right.
They only affect that industry. You could work next door, and it wouldn't affect you at all. It doesn't apply statewide across the country. It's almost like
It's very grassroots.
yeah, it's grassroots. It seems like, why isn't this encouraged by everyone? Like, it would just solve so many things. So it's unfortunate that, I mean, it's obvious why they hate it, because, you know, they organize, they demand more money, hurts the CEO, quote unquote, hurts the
Right,
CEO who's donating to the party, you know, so it's just BS, you know, talking points. But if you're a traditional conservative, it's like, that's the way to go.
Yeah.
That's the way to go.
So, episode 8, we talked about two people. We talked about Rupert Murdoch and we talked about Vladimir Putin. What stood out to you in that episode that you thought was, you know, the most fascinating?
I think this might sound weird, but I call it intellectual monopoly, or information monopoly. And what I mean is the fact that the news that's delivered, the opinions that are delivered to tens of millions of Americans every day, the shots are kind of called from one person at the top. And you think back, you know, before then, 20 years ago, it was this. The system was, you'd have a ton of editors. The person running the story, writing the story, would beg to write it, and the editor would push back and say, "Not yet, not yet." And now it's almost the opposite. It's like, "John, what do you have?" And it's like, "Oh, someone on Twitter used a hashtag." And it's like, "Cool, good," you know. And it's all coming from one source. The shots, which is something that should be a huge red flag, because you know where the news comes from one source. Russia.
Yeah. You know, I thought the thing that was interesting in that series was the fact that Rupert Murdoch is staffing governments on both sides of the Atlantic. You know, he's got former Sky Media executives, and he has a long history of staffing Tim Downing with his executives and people he has that are in the know and within his inner circle. And now he's doing the same thing here in the U.S. And the president of the United States is a former Fox News employee and paid contributor. And most of his staff is too. And, you know, and then when you get fired from the Trump administration, you just got to call Rupert and he'll give you a job at Fox and, you know, everything's good. And then I think the most striking thing that I learned in that episode is that the former Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, is now sitting on the board of directors for Fox News. And that, to me, I think there are some questions that need to be answered.
Right.
So episode 9 was on alternative medicine. This is one that you were excited about, and I wanted to tell you that the thing that I found the most fascinating about it was that multivitamins are all but useless. Yeah. I mean, that was remarkable. They didn't bring down the rates of heart attack, stroke, diabetes. They really didn't prevent any sort of, diseases or ill health. You know, they had no positive or negative effect. It was almost like taking a sugar pill.
Yeah, and to me, it was like how I knew some of it would be BS, you know, like a vitamin that didn't quite work as much as it did. But what struck me was essentially how dishonest the industry can be overall, perpetuating like the products that are sold to you in a manner marketed saying, "Hey, John, you know, oh, screw pharma," you know, that's actually owned. That vitamin that's like all natural is owned by big pharma. And how much, like you said, vitamins and everything, how much people are being duped and people who are desperate. And I thought that was actually eye-opening and quite sickening almost.
So tell me, what did you find interesting about the two-party system? What did you like in that recording?
The biggest issue with a two-party system is the fewer the number of parties, it's like an industry. The fewer number of companies in it, the fewer the competition, you know, they get to make a lot of decisions. And we now have a country where the passengers don't guide the ship. Two people do. Two parties are the ones that are just guiding it along, and that's it. And that's what I think is the attraction of looking at the two-party system, why that comes to light for some people as a source of the problem, because there are a lot of other sources of our problems.
Yeah.
Why pick on the two-party system? But I think it's because it's represented by few.
Yeah. I think the thing that I enjoyed talking about is something that I've enjoyed talking about for over a decade, and that is publicly funded elections.
Yeah.
I think that if we had a system like that in place, we would have a much different country, because politicians would resonate with, as you said in that episode, whoever their donors are. And if their donors are individual contributors and those are the only people they're allowed to take money from, then that's who they're going to serve. And I'm a big proponent of democracy, and I think that is one of the ways in which we can ensure democracy in our own country.
Yeah, and actually, it's funny you mentioned that, John. I wanted to, I meant to tell you earlier is that after you brought that up, I've spoken to a few of my friends who are diehard, bleeding heart Republicans, conservatives, and when I told them about, like, look, an option, it's nothing forced, it's
Right.
an option and it's a way that allows you to clearly see where someone's loyalty lies. It's equal across the board. Whatever they either loved the idea or they had absolutely no issue. Not one of them called it like, oh, you're communist bastard, socialist.
I don't think it is left of center. I think it's democratic.
Yeah.
Not Democratic Party. I think it is indicative of democracy.
Yeah.
So episode 11, we talked about the 50 states of climate change. That was a depressing couple of episodes to put together. What did you take away from that?
Yeah, it was one where, like you said, depressing. With the other ones, when it got depressing, it was still somewhat easy to find some information that gave you hope or balance it out. But this one was. It was easy to feel overwhelmed, and it was easy to see the problem, and the scale is massive. And with the first part of that, I think seeing how interconnected it is, and what stood out, I'd say, the most to me with that episode was the scientist who was interviewed who said, I don't care if you bring your own bags to the grocery store. Make it a priority for your politician, Democrat or Republican, I don't care. You could be Republican. Just make sure climate change is still at the top of your list. Demand action. And that's more important, because I think that is something that is direct and simple and effective enough where people don't feel like they're being shamed and guilted into, and it's like, don't worry about that. That's not going to, throwing away that can's not going to save us. But voting, it's something that is tangible enough for, I think, a lot of people to get behind.
Yeah, and I think you are sharing my favorite part of that as well, is that so few people that claim to be environmentalists vote, or rather do not vote. Like, I think you said 4 out of 5 do not vote, which is disturbing considering how impactful this is going to be in the coming years. So in episode 12, we continued with our discussion on climate change, the other 25 states of climate change. I really hope we didn't miss one in there, and somebody's like, hey, you didn't mention Oregon. But what did you find interesting in the second?
Yeah, in the second half, I loved this article I found where a group of scientists were describing in very good detail, but to non-PhD people like myself, why and how we get such bad rainfall and the drought and the heavy rain, with the precipitation that can be held in the atmosphere versus the evaporation, and how the precipitation in the atmosphere is growing at a faster rate, and realizing that we are in a vicious cycle. Each thing is making the other part worse, and the droughts that's why the droughts will last longer. The flooding will also be a lot worse, but I'll say the one thing that really stood out to me is, at least on local levels, politicians, even on the right, are unfortunately not at the federal level. On the federal level, unfortunately, they're fighting it.
Right.
But on a local level, Wyoming, mandatory in schools teaching about, Michigan, they're building levees and everything Republican. This isn't, it made me realize this isn't like Republicans versus Democrats as much as we think it is.
Yeah, I've been led to believe it is. I think the interesting thing that our listeners don't know is that I accidentally assigned you more states than I had. And so I took one of yours at the end, and that was Montana. And it was kind of depressing because when I looked at your findings on it, to find out that we used to have 150 glaciers in Montana, now we have 25. That was extremely unnerving to me. But at the same time, it's an interesting thing to point to for anyone that is skeptical about climate science and climate change and the effect that it's having both on a local and regional level. So, Josh, a few episodes ago, we talked about how the Democratic Party was the party of the South, and it stayed put and changed the banner of which it held over itself. And the other day, I was reading op-ed in the New York Times, and they had this story in there called "Why Republicans Play Dirty." And I wanted to just read a couple paragraphs from this because to me, it's kind of a overview of what we've been talking about all season. So it says, between 1885 and 1908, all post-Confederate states passed laws establishing poll taxes, literacy tests, property and residency requirements, and other measures aimed at stripping African Americans of their voting rights and locking in Democratic Party dominance. In Tennessee, where the 1889 Dorch Law would disenfranchise illiterate black voters, one newspaper editorialized, "Give us the Dorch Bill or we perish." These measures, building on a monstrous campaign of anti-black violence, did precisely what they were intended to do. Black turnout in the South fell to 2% in 1912, from 61% in 1880. Unwilling to lose, Southern Democrats stripped the right to vote from millions of people, ushering in nearly a century of authoritarian rule in the South. Republicans appear to be in the grip of similar panic today. Their medium-term electoral prospects are dim. For one, they remain an overwhelmingly white Christian party in an increasingly diverse society. As a share of the American electorate, white Christians declined from 73% in 1992 to 57% in 2012 and may be below 50% by 2024. Republicans also face a generational change. Younger voters are deserting them. In 2018, 18 to 29-year-olds voted for Democrats by more than 2-1, and 30-somethings voted nearly 60% for Democrats. It goes on to say, so like the old Southern Democrats, modern-day Republicans have responded to darkening electoral horizons and rank-and-file perceptions of existential threat with a win-at-any-cost mentality. Most reminiscent of the Jim Crow South are Republican efforts to tilt the electoral playing field. Since 2010, a dozen Republican-led states have adopted new laws making it more difficult to register to vote. Republican state and local governments have closed polling stations in predominantly African American neighborhoods, purged voter rolls, and created new obstacles to registering to vote. The Trump administration's effort to include a citizenship question in the census to facilitate gerrymandering schemes that would, in the words of one party strategist, be advantageous to Republicans and non-Hispanic whites, fits the broader pattern. Although these abuses are certainly less egregious than those committed by postbellum Southern Democrats, the underlying logic is similar. Parties representing fearful, declining majorities turn, in desperation, to minority rule. On top of that, they stalled over 100 and some odd appointments of Barack Obama's, including a Supreme Court pick. And then Donald Trump came along.
Yeah.
It's not that the Republicans found Donald Trump and that kind of blew the party up. It has been a long history of them acting a little bit more and more erratically, trying to capture what was, and my whole point to this is, and it's not just to rag on Republicans, it's to make one solid point, and that is this: it's politics. And the idea behind politics is to get people to vote for you. Mm-hmm. And if your ideas are not popular, change your ideas.
Right.
Become more popular. Have ideas that resonate with people, that make people go, that's what I want to vote for. Instead of blaming the media for not covering you correctly, instead of blaming, the government for not treating your point of view correctly, have more attractive ideas and more people will vote for you.
The Republican Party that has, in many ways, gone pretty right. And I think the last election showed it is not about Democrat versus Republican. A lot of people were disgusted with the Democratic Party because they either were not thrilled about Hillary, weren't inspired, but there are a heck of a lot of people on the left who are just fed up with seeing the Democratic Party drift to the right too.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people are fed up, and I'd argue nobody has their damn finger on the pulse. Everyone's treating the Republicans like they're all, racist, homophobe, whatever. But the next group of voters voting, the majority of them do not believe that at all. The majority of them believe in climate change, and so I think.
But as a party,
yeah,
right?
Their policy.
As a party, they're not pursuing climate policy. And if you look at what Trump is doing right now with the EPA, that's not attracting young people to vote for them. And just as I read earlier, two out of three 18 to 29-year-olds voted for Democrats, and probably for that reason too.
Yeah, I think as long as and keep in mind, these are not just the next generation of voters. This is the next generation of politicians. This is the direction the country is heading in, and it's almost like Donald Trump was successful because he actually didn't have his finger on the pulse. What he did was, or he had his finger on the pulse of a different group, not the majority of Americans. He saw this trend of people who are more open, more, adopting social liberal policies, and he doubled down on the rhetoric, the policies, and everything and he knew these weren't the best policies. He didn't care. He just threw it out there. But a lot of people voted for it because it was a big middle finger to people who support gay marriage and talk about climate change. And
that's something that I've started to kind of push away from, is the idea that Donald Trump is even conservative at all.
Right.
Because he's not. Mm-hmm. He doesn't care about, budgets. He doesn't care about limited government. He is a party unto himself. And the reason this has been successful for him is because of his former employer, which is Fox News. All he is doing is preaching the message that Fox News trained him to preach. He went out to their audience and gave them the exact same underlying message that Fox News has been giving for 23 years. And it's an odd message at times. I'll be the first to admit that I do not like Ted Cruz.
Right.
Okay, I don't like his policies. I don't like his ideas on government. I don't think he's a good representation of what Texas is about. But I also don't want to devote 23 years of programming to destroying him and his career.
Right, exactly.
Whereas Fox News has done that with the Clintons and anyone else that they see as too far left. Fox News isn't conservative either. What they are is an organization who takes an issue and says, okay, how are most people covering this? What's a different way to cover it? Even if it's, what is the most controversial way to cover this? Let's take that. And then let's use that to point at all of our competitors and go, see, they didn't take it from this point of view. Therefore, they have a bias. They're the ones that are cheating you out of the real story. Mm-hmm. And that works, right? Because people are like, yeah, how come they're not talking about that? Even though what that controversial portion may be an idea that is clinged onto by 1% to 3% of the population. I'll give you a real prime example. A young man goes to the convenience store. He's 15 years old. He comes back to his girlfriend's house, and the neighborhood watchman shoots and kills him, mm-hmm. right? People said, oh, that poor boy's family. Some said that poor community. Some said our poor nation. But Fox News said, who is standing up for the shooter? Right. Do you think they honestly believed that it was his rights that were violated in this? Of course not. None of them believe that.
Right.
It's just that's the smaller portion that they're not covering. So Fox News covers it and says, look at all of our competitors. They didn't cover it this way. We told you the real truth. We took it from the other angle and showed you the side they're unwilling to show.
Right. And there's, again, there's hypocrisy on both sides by far. And the hypocrisy when it shows up on the left drives me nuts. But on the right too, it discredits the party, and I think that has led to a lot of the, erosion of, we've seen, both parties in quote unquote crisis. I don't think they're being split. I think they're just eroding because they just can't sustain all the BS hypocrisy. Like, for instance, let me give you an example. Brett Kavanaugh is accused of sexual assault. I think it's possible to show victims the utmost respect, compassion, empathy, privacy, everything like that. You can do that and say someone should have the right to defend themselves. It's like, you know what, I agreed with what Lindsey Graham said on how we are a nation of innocent until proven guilty, and that's our values and what that separates us from a lot of the other world, a lot of Middle Eastern countries, African countries, and things like that. Except you lose the credibility because, look at Guantanamo Bay. Yeah. And you think you believe in fair trial. You think that doesn't put a stain on it. You don't think. So anyway, I think we're seeing that. And the divisiveness that, like, Fox News, for instance, is complicit in. It's not just down the middle. Like, over the years, on every issue, they keep dividing. And if you keep doing that in slightly different ways, you have this, like, hodgepodge, and you get people who don't want to be kind of in this corner, and they don't identify with the Republican Party or Democratic Party. The last election was an upheaval of people saying, screw you, Republican Party. Yeah. And it's,
I couldn't agree more. I mean, you've got, within the Democratic Party, you've got a movement that has shifted to the left in 2016 because of Senator Sanders. And now you see, just last week, Elizabeth Warren went ahead of Joe Biden in Iowa. And if you don't think she's going to be the front runner for the Democratic Party, I'm about to prove it to you. There is 3 kind of quasi-moderates running for president in the Democratic Party. You have Joe Biden, who is moderate. You have Amy Klobuchar, who is moderate. And I say quasi because Castro kind of fits in there a little bit. However, you look at the progressive side of the ticket, mm-hmm. You have 6 progressives. You have Warren, Sanders, Harris, Booker, Buttigieg, and O'Rourke. So that's 6 of them. Once you thin that herd down to 1, they're going to double the number of votes that, if Warren has already surpassed Biden, and she still has 6 other progressives to knock out of the race. Imagine Bernie Sanders had a health issue and had to step out.
Right.
All of those voters would switch to Warren, and she would be the presumptive nominee from that point forward.
Oh, absolutely. And I actually just pulled up. Are you ready for some polling numbers
Absolutely.
for the primary?
Yes.
So just 6 months ago, I would say, Bernie Sanders is probably the most progressive by far, even compared to Warren. But let's take a look here. Elizabeth Warren, 6.2%.
When was this?
6 months ago.
Okay.
And this is actually, sorry, I should clarify, this is from Real Clear Politics. This is a
March 2019.
Yep, and this is data collected from 7 different polls. So like people, they all do.
They're aggregated.
Yeah, they aggregate the data. So overall, Elizabeth Warren 6.2% 6 months ago, and she's risen to over 20%. And you look at Sanders at 18%. Biden has gone from about 30% down to just about 24%, according to this.
So he's dropped 6 points?
He's dropped overall. Like it has been a steady drop, but...
what was Sanders at 6 months ago?
6 months ago, Sanders was actually at 23.
So he's dropped 5.
He has. I do believe a lot of people, maybe it's...
Do you think they're walking over to the Warren camp?
I 100% believe they're walking over the Warren camp. And look, I'll say maybe even as much as 10% or maybe even a little more are... It's a weird thing with politics. Bernie Sanders, after 2016, he doesn't have that new car politician smell anymore.
No.
It's hard to get people excited the second time around.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And but Warren does. But I think Warren, because Bernie Sanders hits these overarching points really well, but people are like, okay, we get it. Like, we're screwed. Warren gets out there, and I think what makes her so effective is she knows how to speak to both liberals and conservatives, and she doesn't do these generalizations about conservatives. So I do think it is definitely clear. No other candidate has had a bigger increase in polling numbers.
So wait, let me ask you, because I wanted to go back to that. Have any had an increase other than Warren?
Yes. So
so where was Buttigieg?
He was at like 1.8 at first, and now he's at about 6 now.
Okay.
Which is pretty decent, but you have
He's where Warren was.
Yeah, and here's the interesting, and this is interesting because I think you told me once that, what was it? Was it 2004 when at this stage of the primary, Lieberman was in the lead, and I remember when
18 months prior to the election, it was Joe Lieberman.
Yeah, and I remember when everyone was like, "Oh, it's all Wesley Clark," and then all John Edwards and John Kerry. I even saw.
I remember when Howard Dean was leading the pack.
Yeah, Howard Dean was the big dog, and but look at like Kamala Harris, who started at 10%. She has now dropped to 6.
Has Booker made any ground?
Booker has. Let's take a look here.
And O'Rourke?
No, Booker has gone down about 1%. O'Rourke has actually gone down from like 8.3 to 3. I think he did have some bad performances or whatever, but what really stood out here is, out of all these candidates, there's pretty much one. There are a few who have an upward trend, but nobody has had the upward trend, and not like a spike like Kamala Harris did, and then it dies off. Like a continuous upward trend like Elizabeth Warren. And kind of going back to what we mentioned, like what led us to this is a clear indicator. 12 years ago, or 8 years ago, 12 years ago, whatever it was, there was no way on earth Elizabeth Warren would have had this response. It would have been Biden by 95%. And but this clearly shows where the Democratic Party is going.
The author Norm Ornstein coined a phrase called asymmetric polarization. And it's in a book of his called It's Even Worse Than It Looks. And it's all about how, the political system has kind of gone off the rails. And he points squarely at the Republican Party. And he has for decades been known as sort of an unbiased, viewer of politics. He's not a party member. He is somebody on the outside that just looks at the process and whether or not it's working. And asymmetric polarization is when one party pulls away from the center while the other kind of remains where they're at. Yeah, the left has gone a little bit towards the center, but not in the same way the right has veered away from it. The right has veered very far away from it to the point that moderates within their own party look liberal to them.
Right. And are accused of being closet Democrats.
You've been listening to It Might Be Interesting. Please join us next time.
And we'd love to hear any thoughts, questions, feedback, and even episode suggestions you might have. So if you do have any, please send it over to thoughts@itmightbeinteresting.com. And you can also check out our other episodes at itmightbeinteresting.com.
One of the things that I've been kind of joking about the last few months is the Republican Party should change their party slogan to, we're not going to help with that. And if you apply that to any public policy that's being debated right now, it's like climate change. Yeah, we're not going to help with that.
Right.
The cost of college tuition. Yeah, we're not going to help with that. Cost of healthcare. Yeah, we're not going to help with that.
Right.
Oh, we have a Russian operative sitting in the White House. Yeah, we're not going to help with that. At some point, people have to stop and say, well, what does the Republican Party stand for?
So to round out this episode, we're just going to briefly talk about some of the other episodes and topics to look forward to when we come back on November 4th.
Yep.
And there are a bunch of topics we have, but we thought we'd pick, John and I would each pick two. One that was more political, but we're also doing interesting stuff that isn't. So, John, what are a couple that you have on your list?
So you had mentioned a while ago of doing one called Understanding Statistics. At first, I kind of balked at the idea. I thought it might be a little bit boring. But the more I started thinking about it, the more passionate and excited I got for it. The other one that I wanted to put out there that we'll be talking about in the next season is the importance of NATO. That is becoming a growing topic of concern for me personally, and I look forward to talking about that.
Yeah, and two that really stood out for me that I'm excited about. One is money in politics and why that is a bigger issue, that even if you think it's a big issue, it is the heart and soul of the divide and most of the problems here in America. And the other one that is the non-political one that I just find interesting is sex, the culture of sex and sex education in America. We are very culturally different than the rest of the world. What are the effects of it? Pros, cons, ramifications, trends, how it's changed, and where it's going.
So listeners, we're going to be off the air for a few weeks, and we'll be back on November 4th, like Josh said. And one of the things that we're asking while we're off is we genuinely appreciate our regular subscribers and listeners, and we know that we've been growing a little bit in our subscription base, and we really, truly, genuinely want to thank you. And we ask that you would, re-listen to some of your favorite episodes, or share them with family and friends, because we find it interesting, and clearly you do as well. And we hope that your family and friends would as well.
Thank you, like John said, and I'm really looking forward to meeting again on November 4th and kicking off season 2.
Okay, we'll see you all next month.